Silent Hill 2 has often been used as a prime example in the argument that video games are art. When I was younger, Silent Hill 2 captivated me, and I devoured anything that influenced Team Silent to give me some insight into what it all meant. Investigating what inspired the artist is a really helpful tool to gain a greater understanding of the art. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky was noted as one of the primary influences for Silent Hill 2. The book follows a man who takes a life for his own gain and then unravels because he can't come to terms with his own guilt. He has a complete mental breakdown and craves punishment. He suffers hallucinatory delusions. The most significant inspirations, however, were films. Team Silent wanted a cinematic experience, and it is these cinematic influences which shaped its haunting, dreamlike quality. Art, like dreams, defies logic. Art is not about deciphering clues to find the correct answer. It taps into something deeper, our emotions, our desires, and ideals. But some art feels more like a nightmare. It unsettles us, challenges us, and leaves us searching blindly in dense fog, hiding from the unspoken truths lurking in our subconscious. Silent Hill 2 is a nightmare. It's not just a story, it's an experience that forces us to confront the darkest parts of ourselves and discover what it is that really scares us. While playing the remake, the first thing that struck me was how differently I felt about the game. Not in terms of quality, I think the remake is fantastic. This isn't a review, but if it was, it would earn a high score. But the reason Silent Hill 2 is so important as a work of art is more than the weighing up of successes and missteps. It is about how it makes you think and feel. It is the meaning that you find in interpretation. Because the important question that we should be asking is not, is the remake better than the original? It's, what does Silent Hill 2 say now that it didn't 20 years ago? When Stephen King saw Kubrick's The Shining, he hated it. He hated it because of what Kubrick did to Jack Torrance, the Nicholson character. In the book, Jack Torrance is a man that is twisted by the supernatural forces of the hotel. He is turned into a monster. The book follows a fairly traditional horror plot about a haunted hotel, but the film has much more nuance, because it isn't focused on plot, it's focused on story. The plot is just the series of events that occur from beginning to end, but the story is what it is about. The characters, the setting, the tone, the visual design, the music, the performances, the style, and the narrative come together to provoke emotion. Kubrick is concerned with how emotion conveys meaning, but what this all means is pretty enigmatic. The film ends with a photo of the Overlook Hotel taken long before the events of the film, but there, in the center of the frame, is Jack Torrance. How? Why? The film won't say. The credits roll. The first Silent Hill follows Harry Mason, who is traveling with a 7-year-old adopted daughter when he is suddenly run off the road. Harry wakes up in the town of Silent Hill and realizes that his daughter is gone. So he ventures into town to save her, where he encounters some very strange things. Unlike Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 1 spends much of its plot explaining why the strange things are happening. There is a cult attempting to engulf the town in another reality, a realm of nightmare, and his daughter is actually one half of a ritual to summon an apocalyptic demon. There are ambiguous elements. Dreams are mentioned just as they are in Silent Hill 2, and there is a hallucinogenic drug that is native to the town. In one of the bad endings, Harry is shown dead in his car, suggesting that the entirety of the game has been some sort of death dream. All these elements provoke the question, what is real? But for the most part, things are given a fairly clear explanation through the narrative, but there is this dreamlike quality that made the game a hit. It is uncanny. It is atmospheric. It is a quieter horror than something like Resident Evil, and it's also so much weirder. Harry raised his daughter, but when she is absorbed to become the demon and killed by his hand, she is reincarnated into a new, different infant child.
We don't see him mourn over the loss of the daughter that he raised. She's gone forever. Harry just moves on. This is the good ending. The fact that the endings of the first game are categorized like this is a notable difference between it and the sequel. There is no good or bad ending in Silent Hill 2, at least not by name. There is an ending which seems like a happier end for James, but things still don't turn out great for him. Silent Hill 2 is a lot more ambiguous. There is no attempt to actually explain all the supernatural strangeness in town, at least not through narrative. The plot is concerned with James Sunderland looking for his wife, Mary, in the town of Silent Hill, but she died of a terminal illness 3 years ago. Why is he looking for her? Well, because he received a letter telling him that she is waiting in Silent Hill in Restless Dreams. But the town is empty and there's things in it, things that aren't human. He meets other people in the town who are visiting for their own reasons, but crucially, we only meet one local, and that is Maria. A woman who looks exactly like James's dead wife, but she's different. She has blonde hair, a short skirt, she's showing a little skin. She's promiscuous and she has an attitude. Whoever this is, it's not Mary. For the most part, James never diverts from his path. He is of one mind. Eventually, he comes to the truth, not to the truth of Silent Hill, but of himself. He watches a videotape which shows him how Mary really died. He killed her. He suffocated her in her bed. And from this realization, the game splits off into several endings which are chosen based on your actions in the game. But none of these endings explain what is actually happening in Silent Hill, except for the dog ending, I guess. In that ending, the dog did it. But Silent Hill 2 is not really concerned with plot in the same way that the first game is. Silent Hill 2 is concerned with story. It's concerned with how all these elements come together. The only major plot reveal is that James killed his wife, but the question of what is going on in the town of Silent Hill is never answered. The game won't say. We are asked to piece it together for ourselves. What makes Silent Hill 2 unique is how its horror represents James's inner world, his psyche made real. And this is what makes it a psychological horror. Every aspect of the world gives us insight into who James is, and it's not until we understand who James Sunderland is that we can really understand Silent Hill 2. Horror is really good at communicating a complex story without telling you directly through the narrative. Because horror isn't about making you think, it's about making you feel. It's not cerebral, it's visceral. And that's not to say horror can't make you think, but the ideas are abstracted. Often the things we fear in horror aren't the monsters themselves, but what they represent. Hereditary is a fantastic recent example. It is essentially a haunted house movie, and there is a fascinating mythology that underpins the supernatural aspects of what is happening in the reality of the movie, but outside the reality of the movie, in our reality, there is real fear. And this fear is the one Ari Aster is really communicating to us, and the clue is in the title. It is the fear that we have inherited something terrible from our parents, some horrible aspect that threatens to make us into something that we really don't want to be. And the true horror is the realization that that thing that we fear in us has in turn been passed onto our children. It is hereditary. And that's the true horror. The film Jacob's Ladder has clear parallels with Silent Hill 2. Jacob, the main character in the film, experiences bizarre visions. He sees demons. The narrative often follows a sort of dream logic with Jacob waking up in different realities. And this is all happening because, like James Sunderland, Jacob has forgotten something very important. Jacob was a soldier in the Vietnam War. We see him in the beginning getting attacked. And what Jacob eventually learns is that his unit was given an experimental drug which caused them to turn on each other in a hallucinogenic frenzy. He was stabbed by an American soldier, one of his own men. And this memory causes Jacob to realize that he is actually dead. And this entire movie has been his last dying thoughts. When I played through Silent Hill 2 as a teenager, my interpretation of the game was strongly influenced by Jacob's Ladder. James is even cosplaying as Jacob. So, like Jacob in the movie, I was pretty certain that James Sunderland was dead. The Japanese subtitle for the game even translates to Poem of the Last Moment. And I thought, that is how Silent Hill 2 connects to Silent Hill 1, through the bad ending. Maybe I underestimated the depth of the story in Silent Hill 1. Perhaps it is a psychological horror in much the same way. Maybe the reason Harry Mason's daughter was one half of a demon intended to bring about the apocalypse was because he really hated his wife, the other half of his daughter. Harry's wife is never talked about directly, but the game's manual says that she died from a disease. The screenwriter of Jacob's Ladder, Bruce Joel Rubin, said that film was an adaptation of the Bardo Thodol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The Bardo Thodol details an in-between state of death and the next life, the Bardo. In the Bardo, the soul experiences visions and hallucinations from their previous life until they arrive at enlightenment. And Jacob finds this enlightenment after coming to the acceptance that he was betrayed. He has to come to terms before he can make peace and move forward. Near the end of the film, Jacob's friend quotes Meister Eckhart. "The only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of life. Your memories, your attachments, they burn them all away. But they're not punishing you. They're freeing your soul. So if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth." The art director for Silent Hill 2, Masahiro Ito, tweeted that it's this line which inspired him to make Pyramid Head. The good ending of Silent Hill 2 even mirrors the ending of Jacob's Ladder. In the film, Jacob is led up the stairs into the next life by his angel, his dead son. James is led out of Silent Hill by Laura. Laura is puzzling because she is really the only character that James strays from his journey for. He searches for her for a considerable amount of time. There are pit stops where he stops to speak with other people he meets, but he doesn't go out of his way. What we eventually learn is that Laura knew Mary from the hospital. They were so close that Mary even wrote her a letter saying that she wanted to take her home. She was almost family. And when I played the original after seeing Jacob's Ladder, I thought, well, she can't be real. She must be like Jacob's son. She's an angel. She is a manifestation of this idea of family that James wants back. And when he comes to terms with his crimes against Mary, as a reward, he is able to take a piece of her with him outside the Bardo. But what about everyone else? What about Eddie and Angela? Are they other dead souls? Is this a shared purgatory? I think it's more likely that they are also manifestations. They are angels and devils in the same way as Laura. Eddie, like James, has killed. He killed a dog and shot someone in the leg. But unlike James, he didn't have any sort of reason. He did it because he wanted to, and it was fun. And he kills in Silent Hill as well. He seems unable to stop. Eddie isn't like the other characters in Silent Hill because he isn't searching for someone. He's just sort of hanging out. He's purposeless. And James right from the beginning is disgusted by him. He's frequently portrayed as being gross and pathetic. In the original, there is a hilarious scene where he just hangs out and eats pizza, but in the remake, he eats a tub of ice cream without even bothering to find a spoon. It's disgusting. James even makes this weird jab at one point about Eddie's appetite, which seems a bit unnecessary. Eddie certainly doesn't like it. Eddie starts the game in complete denial that he is a killer, but then slowly convinces himself that he was justified to kill because he was bullied. James doesn't agree. I don't either. The dog wasn't bullying him. But after James tells Eddie that he needs help, he doesn't actually try to help him. In the shootout between him and Eddie, he isn't trying to talk him down because the time for talk is over. He has no choice. He has to put him down. And maybe that is how Eddie is both devil and angel. Maybe that is part of the enlightenment that James needs to come to, that he too is a killer. I think that's Eddie's function in James's journey. He manifests to not only remind him of his crime, but also to provoke him to consider the question of whether it was justified, of whether he is redeemable. I think Angela provokes this theme of justification and redemption as well. Her incredibly tragic life serves as a reminder that life is cruel, and that sometimes people are truly awful. Maybe they deserve what's coming. I think she exists as a point of comparison. She's on the opposite side of the spectrum of Eddie, and James sits somewhere in the middle. We don't know what happened to Angela's family, but when we fight the abstraction of her father, we see her take her own kind of retribution, and she has good reason to. You could argue that she's justified. Angela, again, serves as both angel and devil. As an angel, she reminds James the truth of his real intent to murder. He refuses, but this is the spark that lights the fire. It provokes James's confession. And as a devil, she provides an alternative. If you inspect her knife, it serves as the catalyst for the bad ending. The very bad ending. The one where James drives his car into the lake. But maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is the beginning. Perhaps this is what brought James into the Bardo. James came to Silent Hill with the intention to drive into the lake. There was a fan theory, which has now actually been confirmed both by Ito in a tweet and in the remake itself, that Mary, from the very beginning, her corpse is in the backseat of the car. She didn't die 3 years ago. She died very recently, and she is there in Silent Hill, in his car. It could be that for the entirety of Silent Hill 2, James, the real James, is in his car at the bottom of the lake with the corpse of his dead wife, drowned. When playing the remake recently, I thought back on this interpretation of James and the Bardo often, but that's not the interpretation I came to this time around with the remake. I'll get to why, but meaning does change for us over time. The story can be different, even when the plot isn't. Silent Hill 2 is one of those games that is a magnet for explained videos, those videos that analyze the game for you and tell you what everything means. This is well-intentioned, and it can be fun to play detective, but assigning meaning in such an objective way can be harmful. I've made an interpretation, but that is how I saw the game. I haven't solved Silent Hill 2 for you, that's just one perspective. There are symbols and archetypes which communicate meaning. I'm sure this design provokes a certain kind of idea about what qualities this character has, even if you don't know who they are. Same with this. They are archetypal, but archetypes are not universal. Christian archetypes don't mean much if you were not raised in Christian ideology. I've seen so many people saying things like Maria represents the biblical archetype of Lilith. But what does that actually mean? Lilith doesn't mean anything to me. I have no emotional connection to the archetype of Lilith. It doesn't have any emotional power for me, and it ignores literally everything else about her character when you assign her this role. That's not to say we can't read biblical allegory in Silent Hill 2. We can. It's just a perspective, not a solution. Hermeneutics is the methodology of interpretation. It is a lens to view text, and you can choose to use applied hermeneutics to examine a text from a specific perspective. Take Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream as an example. You could interpret the play from the perspective of the audience for which it was written in 1595, or you can interpret it from the perspective of what it has to say now to us. But you can also choose to view the text from the cultural perspective of the setting, Athens, Greece, or you can choose to examine the mythology of the fairies. You could take a socio-political perspective and interrogate a Marxist interpretation of the mechanicals, or a feminist reading of the lovers. Or you could take the suggestion from the title and interpret it like Freud as a dream. And this is why you can still have productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream that have new things to say even centuries after it was written. And this is why a remake doesn't need to be derivative. An interpretation of Silent Hill 2 using an application of Christian hermeneutics would be absolutely valid. There are biblical allegories within the game. There are themes of sin and absolution. Silent Hill itself could even be read as hell in the same way I read it as the Bardo. But because I observed the influence from Jacob's Ladder, I fell into the same trap that explained videos do. I thought I'd solved the puzzle. I put the game down and thought that was that. I figured it out. But that was just one perspective. By chaining these ideas and characters into one neat concept, we are robbing them of their power. Ito says that he will never reveal the red squares because it's like a magician revealing his tricks. This dude was really mad about it, but that is the magic. This is why we don't know why Marika shattered the Elden Ring, and lore channels can comfortably make regular hour-long videos speculating on the cosmology of the lands between. If we were given all the answers, we wouldn't have this space to wonder. These questions are not riddles, they're questions of philosophy. They are existential questions. We can attempt to answer those questions, but we have to be at peace that there is no definitive answer.
There is no one interpretation, because art will say something different to everyone, and it will say something different to us over time. Ultimately, for me now, whether James Sunderland is dead or not is a question of plot, not story. It seeks to explain what is happening in the town of Silent Hill, but it doesn't convey meaning for me in the same way as it once did. And not only am I a different person than when I was younger, it's a different world. It's a different Silent Hill.
That wife killer's looking pretty fucked up.
Which one?
If you find the ambiguity of Kubrick a bit tough, David Lynch is probably not your cup of tea, but I love him. Lynch's work is disturbing, mystifying, and very, very funny. People say he's weird for the sake of weird.
Yes.
He is weird for the sake of weird. He is intending to be weird. Weird does not mean bad. But there is a reason he is being weird. And even if I don't always understand his work, I do always have a meaningful emotional experience. David Lynch is a massive influence on the world of Silent Hill. He's influenced a lot of games, from Alan Wake to Life is Strange to Deadly Premonition and even Link's Awakening. Silent Hill 2, though, is the most Lynchian of them all. I found Lynch's work through Silent Hill, and it was a real game changer for me. In Eraserhead, Lynch creates a surreal nightmare about a man caring for a screaming lizard baby. He lives in an empty industrial hellscape. His only comfort in this bleak nightmare world is a lady in the radiator with giant cheeks that sings to him that in heaven, everything is fine. When I first saw this movie, it blew my mind. And when the credits rolled, I went right back to the beginning to watch it again. I watched it twice in a row. I have never done that ever again with any other movie. It had that much of an impact. And for that reason, it will always be one of my favorite movies of all time because of how much it broke my brain. I couldn't explain why I was so disturbed by it because I couldn't even explain what had happened. I'm still not entirely sure. At one point, I was convinced the film was about David Lynch's own fears of becoming a parent, but then I saw an interview where he said,
Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Why elaborate on that?
No.
I still don't know what he meant by that, but every time I watch it, I see something new. David Lynch often likens his films to dreams. That is definitely how they feel. They follow a dream logic, and so does Silent Hill 2. James isn't overly concerned with all the craziness he encounters in his journey. Angela tells James to be careful because it's dangerous. James never asks why it's dangerous. Seems like an important detail that might be helpful to know, but James just needs to find Mary. Everything else is irrelevant. In town, James sees a whole lot of blood and a weird, stumbling figure go down a dark, foggy alleyway. He follows it. It's a bizarre monstrosity in what looks like a body bag made of flesh. It's sick. He says, whatever it isn't human, but he never asks, if they're not human, what are they? Or even, why are they here? He also, weirdly, never questions why the town is so empty. The way forward lacks any sort of logical sense. In the beginning, we only know we have to find Mary. We find notes from random people that mention places in town. There is no reason that James should pay any attention to these locations, but he notes them in his map. He goes to a bar, there is a jukebox. He goes all over town to get various components to fix the jukebox, which plays a song which reminds him that he should go to the park. And then the jukebox gives him a key which provides the way forward to that location. Jukeboxes don't do this. They don't give you keys. The Resident Evil games often had bizarre, illogical puzzles, but they were at least vaguely explained away as very silly security measures for a very silly secret organization. But this is nonsense. It's dream logic. Much has been said about the voice acting of the original game and the uncanny quality it elicits. This is what we mean when we say Lynchian. It is this unreality. People say this has been lost in the remake with the more realistic performances, but I disagree. It is still there in the dialogue itself and the space between the lines. In Lynch's films, there is often just that little bit too long between people talking. Shots cut away a little too late, or sometimes a lot late. Dialogue is stilted and softly spoken, but then punctuated with random outbursts of some of the strangest line delivery in cinema. It's intentional, and it all contributes to this dreamlike quality. And it's clear Blooper Team paid attention to Lynch when remaking these scenes. Dreams feature a lot in Twin Peaks. David Lynch himself acts as Gordon Cole. At one point in The Return, he relays a dream he had of Monica Bellucci, the actor. She plays herself. She says, "We are like the dreamer who dreams and then lives inside the dream." But who is the dreamer? You may have heard of the concept of the unreliable narrator. What Remains of Edith Finch is a good example of this in a video game. Each family member's story presents a unique reality, shaped by their personal perspective. By considering these stories as coming from an unreliable narrator, we interpret them with the character's intent, rather than the artist's. We can decode the reality from how they choose to present themselves and their story. But the unreliable narrator doesn't need to actually narrate. In Midsommar, we often see the action from the point of view of Danny, a woman who is very fucked up, both by hallucinogenic drugs and by trauma. We see through her eyes, and she is unreliable. But the Aster film most similar to Lynch, and by extension Silent Hill 2, is Beau is Afraid. In interviews, Aster called the film a nightmare comedy, and that's a perfect description. We are watching the nightmare of someone that is afraid. Very, very afraid of everything. And we can interpret the reality of who Beau is by considering why he manifests this world. We are interpreting his dream, or in this case, his nightmare. The Lynch film that had the most inspiration on Silent Hill 2 was Lost Highway. Ito even said early versions of the game had a narrative structure similar to Lost Highway, but it was abandoned for being too complicated. Lynch is usually very quiet about what his films mean, but I found this video where he is surprisingly candid about Lost Highway. Lynch talks about how he was inspired by the O.J. Simpson trial to tell a story about a man who kills his wife and then has to find a way to live with themselves. He discusses the psychological phenomenon of the psychogenic fugue, which is a dissociative form of amnesia.
The mind tricks itself, and you can either take on another identity or you do what you have to do to hide those things from yourself.
When we start the movie, we meet Fred Madison. He's a musician married to Renee, and one day they get this videotape in an envelope on their doorstep. They play it, and it shows the outside of their house. Weird. But then they get another, and this time, it's the inside of their house. It shows them sleeping. Scary. But not as scary as the next videotape, because that one shows Fred Madison murdering Renee.
Sit down, killer!
Fred Madison goes to jail. He's put in solitary confinement where he experiences headaches. Something is poking around in his skull. And then one morning, after a torturous migraine, Fred is no longer Fred. He is someone new. He is Pete Dayton. The cops find him and have no choice but to let him go because this isn't Fred Madison. But Fred hasn't just changed his physical form. He's crafted a whole new identity, and it's real. He has a family. He has a girlfriend. He has a job. He doesn't just have a new body. He has a new life. But his past creeps in. There is a force that wants him to remember and be held accountable. And one day, in comes Renee. But it isn't Renee, it's someone new. Her name is Alice. She's blonde. She's got an attitude, and she's much more sexually aggressive. Like Lost Highway, James Sunderland creates a new reality where he didn't kill his wife. She's alive and well and in Silent Hill, but the more complex parts of his psyche creep in. By analyzing Silent Hill as a dream and James Sunderland as the dreamer, we are attempting to understand him. And one of Freud's most significant theories is how the self is divided into id, ego, and superego. The town itself and everything in it represents his darkest drives, while James himself is an idealized version of who he wishes to be, with the real James trapped between these identities, the James we never see. I was pretty confused about these 9 squares. I saw this tweet from Ito saying it's based on the 9 monsters. That's what the wiki says they are, but Ito says this is one of the reasons, not the reason. It seems limiting to just take the squares as representing the monstrous manifestations and nothing else. In the remake, the save screen is in real time, which makes it eerier. The whole screen goes red, and each square is different because it's a point of view shot from the perspective of the square. James's head hurts when he interacts with the square. Maria is really confused by it all. I don't know what it all means, but I do know how it feels. And it feels to me that he is looking outside his reality. Maria doesn't see it because she doesn't exist there. It is a window. And there is something on the other side, whether that be outside the Bardo or outside his own mind. It doesn't really matter, but there is somewhere else. And I think it's that reality that the real James is in.
And this is why I don't think he is dead, because there is some kind of communication happening. In one of the new photographs, the red square is shown. It says, shape forces the mind. The idealized James, the superego, is being reconfigured like Fred Madison. His memories are the save data. He is imprinting and recalling, but he is also deleting and overwriting. There is a form of post-traumatic stress disorder called moral injury. It can happen with soldiers with strong moral codes who are forced by their own government to do things that they would consider immoral, like what Jacob and his platoon did. It forces the PTSD sufferer to examine their idealized self in conflict with their own behavior. How do you continue to view yourself as a good person when you've done something you know is bad? You can either choose to change your self-perception and accept you're a bad person, you can atone, or you can try to justify what you've done in some way. And this is cognitive dissonance. It can have a drastic effect on your self-perception. Jacob experienced moral injury when he and his platoon turned on themselves due to the betrayal of his own country. So did Fred Madison, or whoever the dreamer in Lost Highway is, when he killed his wife. So does James when he does the same. There is now this vast divide between who he wants to be and who he is. So he creates this new reality within the town he visited once with Mary when they were happiest. He creates the game we play, and everything is a manifestation of his psyche. Not only the monsters, the bosses, the characters, but all the puzzles and challenges within. Everything helps us piece together the question, who is James Sunderland? But then I found this tweet. Ito says they're all real except Maria, so fuck me, right? They're all real characters that exist. Apparently Laura just got a ride from Eddie on the way in and she's just hanging out looking for Mary. But with the utmost respect, no, fuck that. Ito has said that he doesn't care if people share his interpretation because it doesn't matter. He said that's the magic of ambiguity. That being said, he's also gotten very mad at people misinterpreting Silent Hill 2. He banned this guy from playing the game. I have no idea if Ito was joking here, but either way, it's pretty funny. I don't need to follow Ito's intent. You don't either. This is exactly the same as J.K. Rowling tweeting out her clarifications of authorial intent with the Harry Potter series. That created a big ruckus. You don't need to listen to her. You give those words as much value as you think they're worth. There's this cynicism towards anyone approaching the remake with an interpretation that doesn't align with what the community considers canon.
This word, canon. I have to get into etymology again, sorry, but it's important. Originally, canon meant something very different. If we talk about Shakespeare's canon in the traditional sense, we mean the complete works of Shakespeare, the plays and sonnets officially attributed to him and part of this larger body of work. The term canonized, like saints, has a religious root. The books of the Bible are canon because they've been canonized. They are authoritative biblical texts. Today, though, canon in internet culture is about distinguishing the official story from fan theories. Even Ito himself distinguishes between canon and headcanon, but these terms are useless when we're talking about meaning. There's no such thing as canon meaning, especially when the meaning is intended to be ambiguous. You can't call something open to interpretation and then debate canon. The word doesn't belong in these discussions. Many people have taken this Pyramid Head scene as a display of some sort of sexual violence. I find it difficult to disagree considering Pyramid Head is spreading a pair of legs at groin level, but Ito has fervently disagreed, often and vocally. Does that mean that anyone who feels sickened and disturbed because this scene makes them feel that way is wrong? Is that headcanon? No. You feel however you feel from what is presented to you. It doesn't matter what Ito intended, and if they didn't intend to portray sexual violence, then they probably shouldn't have referenced a scene where that happens. But regardless, Team Silent created the game to be ambiguous. And they did that for a reason, and that reason isn't to make you do a ton of research to understand the community-agreed canon.
Even if we wanted to analyze Silent Hill 2 from the authorial intent of Team Silent, the remake was made by Blooper Team, and in the remake, there are some interesting new additions. There are occasionally these moments that trigger something for James. A sound plays. It's deja vu, because what you come to realize is that these images are from the original game. There are also these photographs everywhere, and these hold a secret, as this Redditor has recently pointed out. They're a riddle, and they spell the words, "You've been here 2 decades." This isn't a remake, it's a sequel. It's set 20 years after the first game, but James is still doing the same thing. This is a cycle. I've seen the word loop used a lot to describe this theory of James repeating his journey, but time isn't resetting. James is. It is samsara. James has been cycling for 2 decades, but why is Laura cycling? If we take it that Angela and Eddie are cycling because, like James, they haven't figured out whatever they need to move on, what is stopping Laura? She isn't tormented like them. She doesn't have this massive traumatic thing that she's dealing with. Both Angela and Eddie seem to have their own Silent Hills. James sees this foggy town with monsters of his own making, but Angela sees fire. Eddie's is cold. What demons does Laura have? What is keeping her here? Maybe this is really just a no way out situation and they are stuck here forever, in which case, dark, but I don't buy that. Even though Ito says himself that these characters are real, I've never seen it that way, and I find it even harder to do so now. I've seen a lot of people in the community hating the remake for this reason, but you can view all these new elements as delusions in much the same way as everything else. If you want to analyze the game with the authorial intent of Team Silent, you can. Your interpretation is absolutely valid. It's just not canon because there is no canon. There is no correct interpretation. Not even Ito's interpretation is the correct interpretation.
But let's follow this cycle theory and see where it leads, because this is the journey that I went on in this playthrough. When I first played the game, as a kid, I took the good ending at its word. James finds peace when he admits to Mary that he killed her not because she wanted the pain to stop, but because he didn't want her around anymore. He hated her. And it is this honesty that is the reason why Mary forgives him, and that allows him to leave with Laura. You win. But with this cycle theory, I have 2 interpretations of how the good ending works. One If you get the good ending when you play the remake, this is the first time in 2 decades that James has successfully done this. Any good endings in the original game didn't happen. I'm skeptical of that because that's most often the default ending that people will unlock. I even went for the Maria ending on my first playthrough of the remake and failed somehow. I got the good ending by mistake. The other alternative is that this is not actually the good ending. If this is the Bardo or some psychogenic fugue caused by moral injury and there is some sort of enlightenment or acceptance that James needs to come to before he can move on and escape this cycle, whatever we see in this ending isn't it. There is something that he needs to do that he hasn't yet done. So what does he need to accept? And this tells me that James Sunderland, the unreliable narrator, is hiding something from us. He's hiding it from himself. Earlier I spoke about how my interpretation as an adult changed because I'm a different person than when I was young. I didn't just mean my interest in the films of David Lynch or the field of psychology. My interpretation is formed by an application of hermeneutics with that perspective in mind, but it ultimately comes down to how I feel. And I feel afraid.
Chopped your wife and daughter up into little bits. And then you blew your brains out.
That's strange, sir. I don't have any recollection of that at all.
The documentary Room 237 dives into what The Shining means, offering wild interpretations that often verge on conspiracy theory. There's one interpretation that claims Kubrick made a film about America's colonization, another suggesting that it is about the Holocaust, and even one positing it as Kubrick's confession to faking the moon landing. Kubrick was obsessively detail-oriented. The documentary Boxes shows that he kept thousands of photos just to decide on a gate for Eyes Wide Shut. He was specific, but focusing on the little details distracts you from the big picture. Susan Sontag rallied against this type of thing in her essay Against Interpretation. She criticizes interpretation as translation, turning X into Y. It's this same trap that explained videos fall into. It is taking Silent Hill 2 as being a riddle that needs to be deciphered to get to the true canon meaning. Everyone seems really confident to make definitive statements about what Silent Hill's monsters represent. There is the common claim that all the monsters in Silent Hill 2 represent repressed sexuality. There is a BDSM aesthetic. It certainly fits for the mannequins. James is for sure a leg guy, and the nurses, well, yeah, but what do we lose when we reduce all these creatures to that one idea? On some nurses, they have the red square on their faces, and Ito's concept art reveals a baby face behind it. Your guess is as good as mine, but these layers are often ignored in favor of forcing every symbol to fit one tidy concept. And even if we accept that these creatures are manifestations of James's repressed sexuality, they are manifestations. They are not reality. We don't know if James actually was repressed because of the involuntary celibacy caused by his wife's illness. Maybe he's just a real hornbag. We don't know anything about his sex life. Maybe he doesn't desire legs at all. Maybe he's terrified of them. Maybe that's why they're enemies. We don't know. If the monsters represent his fears and desires, that doesn't mean we need to accept them at face value, because fears and desires are often illogical. He is manifesting feelings, not facts. Sontag says at the end of the essay, the function of criticism should be to show how it is what it is, even that it is what it is, rather than to show what it means. I don't think Sontag is saying meaning is irrelevant. I think the pursuit of singular meaning is. It is this attempt to explain. Meaning must come from how we feel and not from our knowledge of symbology. Sontag talks about content and form, content being the words and symbols, form being how they are presented. It is the difference between what is being said and how they are being said. You may have heard of liminal spaces. That's the whole horror of the back rooms. They are spaces that exist outside of their original purpose. It's like visiting a school classroom at night. There's a weirdness to it. It feels wrong. And you can hyperanalyze why it feels wrong, but the reason it feels wrong isn't intellectual, it's visceral. When you see Jack Torrance sitting with his typewriter in a giant empty hotel foyer, it feels wrong. Danny Torrance rides a trike around the hotel corridors. He shouldn't be able to do that, but this isn't a hotel anymore. It is a liminal space. Silent Hill is a liminal space as well. The fog obscures most of the screen, making it difficult to get a sense of your surroundings. You see a row of shops in the distance and approach only to find them empty. You turn a corner and find the street is completely walled off by some sort of sheet or cloth. This shouldn't be. Doors open into impossible places. Entire structures decay in the blink of an eye. Jukeboxes suddenly produce keys. This isn't a town anymore. It's something else. Sontag isn't saying that the content isn't important. It's about balance. She's saying that analyzing the content in separation to the form ignores the emotional experience. At the end of her essay, Sontag even goes so far as to say, in place of a hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art. She's saying we need to prioritize how we feel over what it means. I don't completely agree with this statement. I do think hermeneutics has an important function, but I understand her anger at art criticism becoming an exercise in intellectualism, because analyzing art doesn't just teach us about art or the artist, it teaches us about ourselves. I find The Shining really scary, because Jack Torrance isn't turned into this monster because of the supernatural forces in the hotel. He just is one. He's a jerk right from the beginning, and that's told through performance. The Overlook Hotel isn't creating this evil, it is allowing it. Kubrick talks about Jack Torrance and reincarnations.
Well, it was supposed to suggest a kind of, endless cycle of this evil reincarnation.
But the meaning of this is lost if you interpret this literally, because the Overlook Hotel isn't a hotel in The Shining. This is not a literal space. It is a liminal space. Kubrick isn't talking about the reincarnation of one soul. He's talking about all the people who do this, the cycle. It is the violence that lives in us. It is about the capacity for evil and the institutions that allow for it. In Room 237, there is an interpretation that the film is about the atrocities done to Native Americans. I think it is, partly, but you lose a lot if you examine this in isolation. There are images that reference the moon landing. Yes, there are eagles, American eagles. Kubrick isn't doing this on accident. There is a reason, and I think that is to say that this isn't the Overlook Hotel. It's the American dream. White man's burden, Lloyd. It's a land where a man can have everything and still be bored. You can have a beautiful, compassionate wife who will happily drop everything to live in an empty hotel with you over the winter, but God, isn't it annoying when all she ever does is nag, nag, nag. You have a gifted son that loves you, but God, why doesn't he just man up a little? Jack Torrance is just one version of this kind of person. He's part of the cycle. And this is why he is in the photograph at the end of the film, because he isn't visiting the Overlook. He lives there. He always has. He's always been this person, and this person will always exist. Danny sees this. He even has part of it inside of him, this capacity, but he is aware, and that is The Shining. It is an awareness of the horrors of the past and the ability to anticipate a terrible future. It is to perceive intergenerational violence. And when Wendy Torrance is exposed to the true horror of who and what her husband is, she is granted the shine. She becomes aware. She sees the ocean of blood from generations past and future. Her awareness is forever changed because evil isn't something in books and movies or video games or in the news or far away in countries you'll never go to. It's everywhere. It's right here. And yes, I've done quite a bit of analysing the content there in my interpretation. I've attached meaning to symbols in the same way Sontag is warned about, in the same way people do in the Shining Explained videos, but my interpretation is not informed by words. It's formed by how they're said and how they make me feel. This performance is what inspired this meaning for me. It's why I'm scared of this movie, because like Wendy Torrance, I've been granted the shine. I recognize the evil that Jack Torrance represents. I know the cycle. There's something else informing that interpretation, and it has nothing to do with either the content or the form, and this is where the whole thing gets really complicated, because when I watch The Shining now, I can't stop thinking of Kubrick. And when I say I can't stop thinking about Kubrick, I don't mean his intent, I mean him as a person. I can't separate the art from the artist.
What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're fucking killing ourselves out here and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
So we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door. No, I
Yeah,
can't
but when
hear.
you came in like this, you said, just,
We're sitting there because they say, wait a minute, and then you say on the radio,
but when you
go.
do it, you've got to look desperate, Shelley. You're just wasting everybody's time.
Shelley Duvall, who plays Wendy Torrance, had a miserable time making The Shining. She doesn't have a lot to do in the film besides screaming, running and crying, but besides that, Kubrick really didn't treat her nicely at all. It did take a toll, and after all she went through to get the performance that he wanted, Variety said this about her in the film. I can't help but think about his treatment of her while watching the film, and maybe that's why I don't see the story of The Shining as the story of one man going crazy anymore. I see it as a societal problem because I see Kubrick's own role in it, not as a violent psychopath, but as someone who thinks it's okay to treat people like this. I can't separate the art from the artist. I can't keep that weirdness out of my head. It overrides my perspective. And that's not to say I can't watch The Shining anymore, or that I think he should be cancelled. He's dead, so I don't think it matters either way. But that's not what I'm campaigning for. I just can't help how much it informs my interpretation. Shelley Duvall died early this year, and she forgave Kubrick. She is proud of her performance in the film and said he was warm and friendly to her. There's other people in the cast and crew that disagree, but we can only take her at her word. She deserves that. And I know this was a pretty significant detour, but I bring it up because, like The Shining, I can't separate the art from the artist in Silent Hill 2, or in this case, the dream from the dreamer. I don't trust James Sunderland. Not because of the words he says, but how he says them. It is the form, not the content, because he is an unreliable narrator. This is not reality. This is a dream. And it is the dream of a person that has done something I find unforgivable. I argued earlier that Angela and Eddie provoke this question of whether James's murder was justified. This theme is echoed elsewhere in the world. The coin puzzle asks you to assign blame for the death of a woman on the snake that bit her, the man that pushed her away, or the woman herself for, I don't know, not being careful enough, I guess. You can interpret this as a biblical reference if you want, but you're ignoring a good deal by reducing it to that. While it is a reference to Adam and Eve, it's more important as a reference to James. There is another in the gallows of the prison where James is presented with a series of nooses and asked to choose which crime he believes is justified. Each run has a different solution, and the answer is dependent on interpretation. James wants to be justified in what he did. That's why this idea is so present in his world. He needs absolution so he can retain this image of himself as a good person, someone who is worthy of being redeemed. Another example of what Sontag calls interpretation as translation is in one video where I heard the lying figure spits acid
to represent Mary's verbal abuse. And there's this part near the end of the game in both the original and the remake where you hear this.
What do you want, James? Flowers? I don't want any damn flowers. Just go home already.
And people point to this as the verbal abuse. They say this is what Mary is apologizing for in her letter. Ito tweeted, "The flesh lip and the mandarin has those lips on their appendages to represent this verbal abuse. I can't abide that." It could be that he means it is James that considers this verbal abuse and not Ito himself. They could be representations of his feelings and not the facts. Just because James feels that way doesn't make it so. But I have seen some people, not James, actual people in our reality, use this as justification for him murdering her. They say, well, guess it's not so black and white. It was toxic on both sides. He fucking murdered her. In the original game, there is an uncensored audio file of the videotape James watches. I'm going to play that for you now. It's a lot, so feel free to skip to the next timestamp if you want. This sequence in the hallway is really well designed because if you hold your stick forward, you will reach the end of the hallway right about at this break in her monologue. And if you don't stop, then you will miss this.
Wait. Please. Don't go. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please. Tell me it'll be okay. Tell me I'm not gonna die. Help me.
This is heartbreaking. James killed this woman, and I feel nothing but utter contempt for him. What Mary says in this hallway is not evidence of verbal abuse. Even if we were presented with an objective reality, which we're not, this is a very scared woman with a terminal illness, temporarily losing control of her emotions. I'm sure everyone has gotten angry and said something to someone they love that they really regretted, and I'd say it's likely worse than what Mary said right there. The way Stanley Kubrick talked to Shelley Duvall was worse than this, and she walked away calling him warm and friendly. Taking care of someone you love that is terminally ill is an extremely difficult thing. It is traumatic, it is painful, and it can sometimes take a very long time before the inevitable comes to pass. I'm not devaluing the trauma of the partner in that situation, but if you find yourself in that situation, you talk to your partner, you get advice, you go to fucking therapy, for Christ's sake, you don't murder them. I've seen so many people justify what James did because of the pain of taking care of her. They say that she was abusive, distant, and unable to reciprocate his sexual desires. Let me make this clear. You are not entitled to kill someone because they're too sick to fuck you. This is the most human we see Mary. Outside of this moment, we never see any negative emotions. We only see compassion and love, and I don't see any of it as an honest depiction of her. James doesn't just create an idealized version of himself, he creates an idealized version of Mary, too. Actually, he creates Maria, the sexy, young, healthy woman Mary could never be, and a version of Mary herself, a Mary who still loves him despite what he did. In Lost Highway, Fred Madison says this when asked why he doesn't own a video camera.
I like to remember things my own way. How I remembered them, not necessarily the way they happened.
And I see so much of this game like that. It's how James prefers to remember, not the way they were.
This is why I feel so uneasy about the good ending. James is absolved by his own victim. She says she was in pain and asked for it to stop. He wasn't killing her, he was helping her. James admits that wasn't the only reason why he did what he did. He did what he did because he hated her. He wanted her out of the way. But that apology rings completely hollow when compounded with the fact that he is manifesting a version of her to forgive himself. But it's not just Mary that forgives him. Laura does. He tells Laura what he did to his wife, and she runs away from him, terrified. But none of that matters when he hands her a letter from his wife excusing him. Something is wrong here. I don't think anything in this letter is from Mary. This is a fabrication. She doesn't apologize for lashing out. She doesn't say that she wants him to live for himself. And she doesn't say, "You made me happy." Mary doesn't forgive James because she's dead. He killed her. She isn't seeing Silent Hill in Restless Dreams. She's a corpse on the back seat of his car. He is making her say these things. He is manifesting this to absolve himself, and we know that because it doesn't work. The cycle continues. But even if you interpret that the letter is real, which is valid, it was written before she was murdered by her husband, something she would never imagine he would be capable of doing. None of the words in this letter are addressed to a murderer. They're addressed to the husband she loves. She isn't forgiving him. She's saying goodbye to the man she loves before she passes away, completely unaware what her cause of death will be. In the Maria ending, we see a glimpse of another James. You don't see this person in the good ending because James doesn't want to think of himself as this person, but this is part of him. This isn't a different James. This is who he is. When I first played this game, I believed in the redemption of James, and I felt that while he wasn't a good person, he repented and served his punishment. I analyzed Silent Hill 2 as content, and I picked apart the symbols, and I came up with a theory about the Bardo. I felt very pleased with myself, but I never considered the form, because it's not what is said, it is how. It is presented in a world that is unreal because he made it. James manifests these monsters. He manifests Maria. He even manifests a version of himself. We have no reason to believe that this Mary resembles the real Mary any more than Maria does. We only trust her because James trusts her, but James is unreliable. She is telling him what he wants to hear, and because I can't separate the dream from the dreamer, I'm questioning everything that James shows me. I'm scrutinizing every detail of the world he manifests, but the real emotional gut punch for me is when I look at Mary in this scene with these blisters on her face, and I think this terrible thought: how sick is Mary really? I have no empathy for James Sunderland, and that scares me. I don't think he's worthy of redemption.
I don't see James as a man that did a bad thing anymore. I see him as just another manifestation of a deep societal problem because I'm not a kid anymore. I've grown up and I've lived a life and I've become aware of this cycle. I have the shining. After finishing the game while processing these emotions, I had a genuine, honest to God, existential crisis because of how differently I see the world than when I was young. And maybe I needed this challenge of empathy. I needed to be asked the question, does James deserve redemption? And I needed to hear myself saying no, because that taught me a lot about who I am and how I see the world right now. And that was honestly a little shocking. And that is the power of art. It reveals. On my second playthrough of the remake, I wasn't asking, is James a good person? I was asking, am I a good person? And I started to look back at all the things that I've done in my life that I feel guilt and shame over, and I start to crave absolution. And I am afraid because I see myself in the overlook too. And while I'm writing the script, I start to think about the mask that I wear, my idealized self, because I too am an unreliable narrator. I'm not Gred Glintstone. I am a construction in much the same way as this James Sunderland. And suddenly I am analyzing my own intent in creating this avatar for myself. Why do I choose to present myself as someone that is ultimately optimistic, someone that can see the value in alternate perspectives? Is that even true? Or is that just how I would like to be seen? And what am I even hoping to achieve by turning this video into a meta commentary? I don't know. But if my argument is for a focus on the emotional experience in art criticism, then it would be pretty hypocritical not to share mine. I hope the next time around I can learn to trust James and not see the worst in him. Because maybe Mary did really ask him to stop her pain, and I'm just choosing to see a lie because I've become cynical. Maybe Silent Hill isn't his manifestation. Maybe Angela and Eddie don't serve to suggest to him that his crime is justified. Maybe Ito is right, and it is just the monsters and Maria that are the manifestations. Maybe Laura is real, and he isn't making her say those things. And maybe James does really leave Silent Hill to live a life atoning for what he did, and maybe he does deserve redemption. But right now, I don't forgive James Sunderland. I hope he spends another 2 decades in Silent Hill. I hope he rots. Because it's not the monsters of Silent Hill that I've been seeing in my nightmares. It's him.
Thank you to my lovely patrons. Thank you to Bender and Spencer Moss, and a very special thank you to Laker. I do these videos all on my own. I do all the research, writing, editing, and I'm a pretty new channel, so it's just something I do in my spare time. Your support means that I get to spend more time making this stuff and get better equipment so it's all easier to do, and play more games so I have more to talk about. If you do choose to be a supporter, you'll see extra content. I upload live commentaries of my video essays, and I will be uploading some deleted scenes that didn't make the final cut of this video in some form or another. There was a lot more I wanted to say on this topic, but it couldn't really fit in with the overall tone. So if you do want to hear me speak more about art appreciation and critical analysis, keep an eye out on the Patreon. I really, really do appreciate it. I know the subject matter I discussed today has been tough. There is a page for Silent Hill that Konami has created that helps you find a helpline for mental health support. I'll put the link in the pinned comment. If you feel that this has brought something up for you and you want to talk it through with someone, don't be afraid to do so if you're having a tough time. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I really appreciate you hearing me out. Be kind to the people you love, and please, please have a great day.